Welcome to the first episode of Tuonen Portti's new podcast. I'm your host, Konstantin Tuonihovi. Most of the upcoming content will be in Finnish, but from time to time we will release English content as well. Our guest tonight is Dr. Martin Locker from the Perennial Pyrenees project. He is a trained archaeologist and researcher living in Andorra with over a decade's experience in the discipline. Dr. Locker's work has been published in several journals and books. Outside of archaeology, he has a long-held fascination for cultural heritage, mountainous places and all things rustic. Greetings, Martin. After that introduction, could you tell me a bit more about your current professional activities in Andorra? Any projects you might want to mention?
Sure. I have just finished a monograph, writing a monograph. It still has to be laid out and everything else. That will take a while. But it's a monograph based off of about 6 to 7 months of spending my weekends tramping around as much of Andorra as I possibly could, looking for and at apotropaic markings carved on rural buildings, specifically door panels and window lintels, entranceways essentially on the exterior, because it's a very niche topic, obviously, but a great many of these door panels are being discarded and replaced with wooden or metal ones. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is the older ones which bear these markings are being gotten rid of. So it's kind of an attempt to form an archive and go a little bit into the kind of potential symbolism using extrapolated comparisons with elsewhere in the Pyrenees and Europe, etc. So that's really the most recent Perennial Pyrenees project. I'm not currently recording any new musical material, though I'm sure that will change in the next few weeks. And I am writing a new novel off the back of my previous one, but it's unrelated. It's set in rural Britain, and it's going into a concept I came up with about 6 to 8 months ago in one of my musical productions, I guess you call it, called The Vagabond Trust. So it's looking at a sort of rural English fictional association, really, of travelers and wayfarers and their links with gypsies and that kind of thing, and gypsy folklore and this potentially fictional folklore as well. So that's kind of what's going on at the moment.
So a lot. You are ever so prolific.
Got to keep busy. Who knows when it will all come tumbling down?
Yeah, I think that's a topic I'm very well versed myself. At least that's kind of like the hellhound on my trail. The reason I try to be as prolific as I can, because, for example, I'm 45 years old now, and I remember you are some years younger than me, but still, it's like if you have a mission, you're on a mission.
Well, it's if you have the time, you may as well use it productively.
Could you give us some kind of a backdrop? What's the weather out there? What's the season like? And what's your surroundings?
In the Pyrenees. Well, actually, last week it snowed quite heavily, but that's kind of melting away a little bit at the moment. It's going to snow again next week, and I think that's going to be settling in for the long term over the winter. It's bloody cold. I live above a little village in the mountains of Andorra, so it's not in the town, and it's very attractive. It's very nice. You walk out your door, and within 2 minutes you can be on a woodland path and away from people, which is obviously a very pleasant thing. But yeah, it's just cold at the moment, quite dry, but it's going to start dumping down probably with snow again next week. So we'll see what kind of road chaos that's going to cause. Because, well, I don't know, man. It's one of those things here in which the first few instances of snow, despite the fact that it happens every year without fail at roughly the same time, everyone suddenly forgets how to drive, how to deal with the snow, etc., etc., etc. So it's one of those settling in periods which you just have to learn to live with, really.
It's so funny. It actually sounds a lot like Finland. We have this these yearly problems in the winter with the train traffic, and of course when it's snowing a lot, there are like many car accidents because people are so stupid that they drive their cars like just directly behind the car in front. It's annoying, but what can you do?
The funny thing is, actually, last week, at the point of recording, last week, there are 2 kind of Catholic holidays. And so what happens in those times is that you have the majority of Spain like bookending some enormous long weekend or taking the whole week off and descending on Andorra for their Christmas shopping, etc. Of course, none of these people have any idea how to really deal with kind of snow, etc. So although it wasn't snowing particularly much this year, last year it's absolutely dumping down this time. And they all came up and they had that kind of like their snow socks tearing off, and they had no idea how to drive in the snow or, come across or experience snow. So it's just a complete bedlam of incoming tourist cars at this time. Once next week happens and, that kind of thing, you start getting the skiers coming, and they're obviously much more accustomed to snow.
Yes.
But it's this sort of like, it's the boutique brigade which come up for their Instagram shots with, oh my God, look, snow. Oh, how Christmassy. You think, oh, fuck's sake.
Yeah,
This is the first world problems of living in a mountain hideaway. So.
That's the reason I try to spend most of my time at the cottage near the rural area of Finland. It's pretty close where I live, and the contrast is just enormous. Very seldomly you see other people when you are walking the dogs, especially at night, and it's so delightful.
Well, speaking of that, Matt, it sounds slightly ludicrous, I suppose, but I have in my head like an entire temporal dependent map of the best places to walk in Andorra in terms of, will there be tourists there? What time of day is the best place to never come across anybody at all? So I kind of arrange a lot of my walks around that kind of premise, is where can I go with no people and that I'm not going to, fall off the edge of a mountain and die.
I can relate to that. It's like it's well worth the risk, so to speak. It's like even if there is the risk,
it certainly is.
Maybe we are like
you know what it's like when you get trapped. Well, you know what it's like when you want to walk when you get trapped behind 5 people in front and 5 people behind.
Yeah.
It's like a bloody Andrex trail.
I can only imagine how annoying that it is in that kind of environment. So basically,
you want to be alone with nature, and then it sounds quite petulant, but I do value quiet. So.
It's interesting that you kind of telepathically answered my next question, which was basically, how does your rural daily life in Andorra differ from the time you lived in the city? And I presume you have, and at one point of your life, lived in some kind of major city.
Oh yes.
So what are?
Well, I spent 8 years in London at university, which is where I did the rigmarole of BA, MA, and the PhD stuff. And to be fair, as a young person, not that I'm very old now. I'm 36, even though I feel about 80. If you're young, it's perfectly nice, man. But Jesus Christ, there's no way in hell I could go back there now to live. It sounds quite ridiculous because Andorra is a country which is minuscule. You can drive across it in roughly about an hour. It has one major town, and the rest are essentially, you call them either very small towns or large villages. But I used to live down in the town until a couple of years ago, well, 3 years ago now. And you'd hear people go, oh my God, it's so busy here. Oh, I just can't wait to get back to my apartment I was like, this is busy. What are you talking about? Lo and behold, 3 years later, do I have to go into town? There's so many people. Oh, it's so full of, it's so noisy. It's funny how quickly you adapt to new situations.
Yeah, I think that's like a very human thing to do, that people get accustomed to pretty much any kind of environment, even kind of maybe some persons can get accustomed to some kind of solitary cell, for example, but that would be pretty rough anyway. What do you think are the best perks of the rural life over there?
Quiet. I think quiet, especially now with our lives. I mean, not just in terms of like ambient sort of, urban noise, etc. Obviously, living in a rural thing, you can get rid of the ambient noise of of urban stuff, which is very, very nice. It's very, very important, I think, if you're someone who enjoys their own company, which I do, for better or for worse, it's a great thing to be able to have access to. Of course, there's the other kind of noise, which is all the social media stuff, which wherever you live, that's really up to you to kind of switch off from. But I think the peace and quiet, it's the ability to walk outside your door and within 2 minutes, you're among trees and pastures and that kind of thing. It's a very underestimated medicine, I think, for all sorts of, if you feel depressed or you feel in any way kind of negative. It's a great calmer and a great perspective giver, which is something
I think I lost you. Can you hear me? There was some kind of audio glitch. Yeah, the recording.
I don't know what.
Yeah, I think your voice became glitchy, and then there was just quiet. Yes, okay. I think that happened last time too, but it's recording.
I'm not. I do wonder if,
yeah,
at the moment, there is a slight internet issue because we do have in Andorra a shit system. Rural life, man.
Do you sometimes churn for a simple, more tribal life? And what I mean by this is you already live in rural environment when compared to the city life, of course. Would you be willing to kind of upgrade that experience to, for example, the time travel to some 200 years ago or something, back to the OG Andorran life?
It's a difficult question to answer because, well, firstly, I think nowadays we have that term tribal flung around an awful lot. Usually, I have to say, by grifters on the internet who have this idea of tribe being essentially a collection of friends who drink together, mess around with motorbikes, and have the occasional boxing match. I don't really want to use the word tribe in that case. And I think Andorra, in terms of going back 200 years, is a slightly special case in the sense that really before 1970, 1960 here, because in 1960s, 1970s, you had a sort of, not discovery, but the starting of a kind of influx of tourism and money, essentially, for better or for worse in various cases. But before then, it was very low population density, very, well, I should choose my words carefully, quite poor, reliant on pastoralism, so cattle and livestock, really, smuggling and other, I guess towards in the 19th century, we had an iron industry here. But you're talking about a very difficult life, physically speaking. You can make, all sorts of adjustments for the benefits of community differences, etc. But it was tough, very tough, and not necessarily something which would be envied. I do think they should, on a separate note, I do think they should keep a lot of the cultural aspects still today. And they seem to be being replaced with a kind of generic wish for luxury prestige, which I think is a mistake. But to go back to your question, honestly, I think that the best sort of time to be living with a moderate, comfortable income, because if you're poor at any stage in history, it's not great, let's be frank. But to be alive with a kind of comfortable or moderate income, I think in the late 19th century was probably one of the best times, at least in terms of, for me, the cultural aspects and the intellectual aspects. And I say that because you had this it's rather lovely crossover point between the past and the future in that way, in which you had the very, 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 very tangible and present daily life existence of the continuity of centuries of cultural identity and cultural practices and all sorts of aspects which are pretty deeply rooted. But you also had the emergence of various industrial technologies, etc. And this created quite a febrile point in which there was a great sense of intellectual freedom, hobbyist antiquarianism, research, all sorts of things, intellectually speaking, which were quite boundless in terms of their freedom to go and do and research and look and see and record and write and express. And I think, and that you also had that time of Europe where you had you still had the definitive existence of almost relict feudal states combined with emerging nation states. And this created a very, very interesting dynamic and an interplay between hyper-regional cultures and emergent national cultures. And I think that was a very interesting time to be alive. And even aesthetically speaking, for me, I think it was pretty good, man. Of course, the further on you go, you start to get into some very unpleasant territory. But that particular point, I think, is something which, if you're talking about tribal, well, we don't have to talk about tribal really, but in terms of maintaining community and the social contract which existed between various classes and various people, I think that was a pretty good model as it was.
Okay, I used the word tribal, and after I used the term, I understood myself that if I'm referring to something tribal, it would be further than some 200 years ago. Maybe it's like a town life or some kind of like a folk life, but tribal life must go so much further down the history than people were actually in the direct sense of the term tribal.
It's a very, I don't know, you see, because if you're talking about tribal life, I mean, are we restricting tribal as we would kind of understand it in the hunter-gatherer sense, which is the kind of predominant image people have? With the Neolithic Revolution and the emergence of settled agriculture and the beginnings of more structured hierarchical societies, the element of tribalism tends to give way to a more permanent hierarchy in a way. And of course, a hierarchy which is dependent on labor necessarily rather than, or labor as in terms of if you are entering into priesthood or warfare or aristocratic leadership, that kind of thing. I think when people use the word tribal, I think what they're really meaning is not so much the kind of hunter-gatherer thing, because let's face it, very few of us are capable of entering into that state of being now, or at least without a lot of preparation. I think when people talk about tribal, they're more they're kind of looking for a more connected, broader family, or at least small scale community, which is reasonably self-sufficient and interdependent. I think that's more where people are going with the word tribal, which I think is a perfectly laudable, especially in the face of today's ultra expansive society where people have a tendency to feel lost or meaningless. Atomized, exactly. I think that I can totally understand the tribal aspect. Personally speaking, I'm quite antisocial. So I don't, the idea of being around some, a certain, relatively medium-sized group of people all the time doesn't particularly appeal. But I can certainly understand the reasons why people yearn for that. There's a difficulty there, of course, looking back at things with rose-tinted glasses. There was still interpersonal drama, strife, political problems. I mean, all these kind of human
diseases, yes.
problems. So a lot of these tribal things now are based on friendship groups rather than family.
That's
so you
true,
can choose
yes,
who's
yes.
in and who's out. Whereas if you're in one of the original, the original format tribes, I mean, your family, maybe you don't get on with your family.
Like a blood
kind
family.
Of stuck. Yeah, you're kind of stuck. So I think people should be a little bit more careful, or at least a little bit more aware of what they're describing when they're talking about, oh, me and my tribe. You and your tribe is you and your buddies, which is a friendship group, which is great. But, having a back patch or whatever ritual you've kind of come up with, just, hold back on the labels a little bit. Which actually is something I'd apply to most people for everything. Hold back on the labels a little bit, but we can get into that later.
Now that you mentioned that the life of the Pyreneans was, of course, hard and maybe harder than the life of the basic, for example, Spanish people at the time, say 200, 300 years ago, because of the terrain, which is, of course, very how to say, not hostile perhaps, but like challenging terrain.
It's rugged. I would say that obviously it depends where you are in Spain. If you're looking at down in the kind of Sierra, I mean, life's pretty. Spain is a very curious social history in that way, because I won't go into it because we haven't got time. But it retained I would say a very feudal arrangement for a very, very long time, very, very long time. And the Spanish peasantry, I mean, that was hard. I mean, really, really hard life. I mean, there's a reason why anarchy, Spain in the Civil War was the only place really where anarchists got any kind of foothold. And so but returning to the Pyrenees, I mean, it's a mountainous terrain. I mean, it has its lush valleys and splendid summers, but it also has some pretty severe winters. And, much like any mountainous territory, I mean, you have to deal with that the best way as possible. Yeah, it's the mountains, man. I mean, it's difficult, and there is a great tendency to look at chocolate box Christmas kind of thing as this kind of very lovely, snowy, glimmering landscape, and it's very, very attractive. But it will kill you if you don't make the proper kind of provisions. I mean, in Andorra, for example, looking at the winter, I was talking to some people about this, and they remember like their grandparents saying that they were as we're talking like young adolescents sent over into France during the winter away to work, because firstly there was no work to be done in Andorra because there was no agriculture because it's winter, and secondly they could actually earn some money because there was no way to earn money in Andorra during that time and then bring it back to the family in the spring. So it's tough.
Do you think that the Pyreneans are kind of a urfolk, hardy folk? For example, the people who originally inhabited Finland must have been somewhat crazy in the sense that the climate is at times pretty harsh over there with a long winter, and it's not that lush over here. I mean, in the sense that the winter can be like it can pretty easily kill you if you don't have the proper preparations.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have some extraordinary winters.
The spirit of the people, how would you define the spirit of the Pyrenean people?
Well, they're quite obviously independent because you have to be. But that also ties into the idea of the Pyrenees as I wouldn't go so far as to say a separate entity to France and Spain, but certainly if you consider that it's only in the mid-17th century that with the Treaty of the Pyrenees, you had a kind of a hard border between France and Spain running down the Pyrenees. Before then, the territories were very, very shifting. And given the sheer volume of valleys and hidden, I suppose you could say, like hidden folds in the Pyrenees, and the arrangement with the pastures and all that kind of thing. There was a lot of traffic up and down the Pyrenees from Pyrenean pastoralists, and of course, smuggling and all sorts of things were going on, and still do actually. And of course, that if you combine that kind of method of living with things like hyper-regionalism, the phenomenon of, obviously the big example is the Basques, but I mean you have other areas like Huesca, Andorra to a degree, the Bayonne. All these areas have a very, very, very strong regional identity because they were not, they have a history of being a kind of hinterland which wasn't seen or wasn't exploited as effectively as other lower, more fertile or easier areas in France and Spain which border them. So you have the Pyrenees as this very self-reliant ecosystem, essentially, both economically and spiritually, I guess you'd say. Not to say that they obviously we have people from low pastures kind of the Pyrenees for high pastures, so it wasn't like it's a mess, is what I'm trying to say, in terms of like it had arrangements obviously with neighboring regions, but also it had interpersonal relationships with other places in the Pyrenees, etc., etc. But you have a people which are very, very independent spirited. They're not taking kindly to being told what to do. And if you think about the archetypal industry of the Pyrenees as smuggling, really, that gives you a flavor of the kind of people that inhabit the Pyrenees. There is a very much a self-reliance, not a huge regard for the regulations of the adjoining mainlands so much, and there's a very independent flavor to the various regions of the Pyrenees, I'd say.
It's like the people and territory is kind of liminal, but we can get to that in the second phase of this interview. Just I wanted to make a point here,
Flag it up.
but that's coming. And now that we are in this topic, I would ask you that the local folk traditions, they have this ritual garb with animal motifs such as bears. Actually, there's something which I noticed, like say around more than maybe it was like a bit over 2 years ago. I discovered your Instagram page, Perennial Pyrenees, and I would advise the audience to check out. And you had this interesting old photograph of a person, a man, probably in some kind of horned suit. I think it's some kind of horned like a beast.
Probably a bull.
I think in German they had this Rauschnacht and this kind of festivals with people dressing up as in animal garb, like power animals. That's quite interesting topic. Could you tell us more about the local shamanism and the witchcraft side of things?
In the Pyrenees, you have quite a few representations around Candlemas, the end of February. Or in February, it depends obviously on the Gregorian calendar, but around late February, of these what they call the festos or fetetos, or basically baldos, or bear festivities, essentially, is what they are. Now, before I describe them, it's interesting to note that there are the theories behind the origins of these bear festivals are complex because they're obviously very difficult to prove. There are some people who think that there is a broader European origin for them in the sort of Siberian areas. There is a theory which has some traction, but I'm not going to say whether it's more likely or not because we don't know. But there is a theory that ties directly into the Pyrenees, actually, regarding the bear festivals and their spread out into Europe. Because if you look at various places in Europe, right from Germany to England to France, over into Sardinia, into Romania and other places as well, you have these very similar festivities following similar narratives and similar emphasis on the bear. Now, there is the idea that in the last kind of large, for want of a better word, the large kind of ice age that covered Europe in ice, there is the thing called the Franco-Cantabrian Refuge, which was effectively a portion of the northern Pyrenees around the Basque Country, which had more favorable living conditions. And that there is this idea that a lot of peoples from neighboring regions gathered up in that refuge for the duration of the ice sheets being at full force. And as they started to retreat, the people diffused back into Iberia and into France and over, diffusing over back into kind of repopulating areas of Europe which were under ice, which was now retreating. Now, there is this idea that within the Basque Country, for various etymological reasons, I can't really get into it because I haven't got it off the top of my head, but there is this idea that in the Basque Country, there is this very primal bear kind of cult, which sounds rather extravagant, but if you look at the Paleolithic sites in caves, etc., there is certainly a great deal of bear symbolism in the Paleolithic within the Pyrenees. Not exclusively, but over-representation, one might say, considering the distribution in other sites. So if this is the case in the Basque Country, at large, not talking about necessarily the now political area, but the kind of broader Bascoid regions, and it's interesting to note as well that some people think that looking at toponyms, including in Andorra, there is certainly a strong Basque presence linguistically in some of these toponyms right across the Pyrenees. So the original kind of Pyrenean communications may have been in the kind of early Bascoid. But anyway, returning to the ice, that as these people kind of diffused out from the kind of broader Pyrenean Basque region, they took with them this bear symbolism in some way. And that found its way of manifesting in various festivities across Europe as they kind of went into the mainland once again. That's a theory by a professor she's in Ohio State University, I think, or she was last time I checked, called Rosalind Frank. And she's done a lot of work on this. So I advise people to go and look at her research if you're interested in that kind of thing. But within the Pyrenees, we have these bear festivals still ongoing. There's one in Andorra. There's a very, very famous one in Prastamolo, which is not far from here in the French Pyrenees. There's numerous examples up and down. There's the processions, which aren't strictly speaking at the same time of year, but have a similar ethos in the Basque Country, whose names I cannot pronounce off the top of my head, Gentiliac or something like that. But there's all this representation of largely kind of bear-ish symbolism. And in some of the more structured ones we see in Prastamolo, for example, which is very, very famous, similar here in Andorra and other places as well, in Huesca, in the Aragonese Pyrenees, there's this narrative of a bear, which, as I recall, it sort of attempts to steal a woman who's usually called some derivation of Rosa, and then it takes the woman into its lair, and it either attempts to essentially rape her, or it gets stopped before that point. But in either case, it is then taken by hunters out, and then it is either killed or it is shaved. Now, what's interesting about the shaving aspect, interpretation-wise, is that this is seen as in some way civilizing the bear. Now, what's another interesting aspect of that is that firstly, there is a substantially important piece of French folklore, which is very, very famous, which again, I can't recall, is called Jean de l'Ours, I think, in which it has many derivations, as all these folk tales do, but the general thing of this is that the boy, Jean, is conceived from the union of a bear and a woman in its cave. And he has all sorts of like big strength and becomes a blacksmith and blah, 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 blah. Blacksmith also has a huge amount of folkloric significance in the Pyrenees as well as other places. But also there's this popular idea, I believe it's present in Basque mythology, but also in other areas of Pyrenees as well, that the bear is like a human when it's amongst bear hunters. They all say it looks so much like a human when it's caught and skinned. So there's this kind of connection between the bear and the man, physiologically speaking. And there's all sorts of other things going on, which I can't really get into. If you read my book, Tears of Pirenne, you'll be able to check it out in chapter 2. But there's all these other aspects which chime in as well, which are very, very curious. But there's definitely this, in the Pyrenees, there's this very strong resonance still with the bear festivals and the idea of the bear. Of course, Candlemas around February is when, typically speaking, you have the bear coming out of hibernation. So that ties in nicely as well. But yeah, I mean, it's also just, I think only like last week or something, they finally got UNESCO, I think, to attribute all of these bear festivities under a kind of umbrella piece of intangible cultural heritage, which is very good because it means they will be protected and exist in perpetuity as well. Yeah, exactly.
In Finland and in the Finnish mythology, the bear also is like a very important figure, and maybe in many European countries. Of course, it's like
absolutely. I mean, I think I read in Finland there's some taboos of, well, traditionally speaking, amongst bear hunters, there's taboos of how you may or may not kill the bear. Like you can't just like sneak up on it. It has to be not a fair fight, obviously, but there has to be some level of chance given to the bear. It doesn't deserve being snuck up on and shot in the back, basically. There's all sorts of things from around the world. I mean, even like Korea, like with the Anku and things. Not Korea, I think it's Japan actually. But all sorts of places around the world where the bear has this kind of reverence attached to it in various forms.
It might have something to do with the fact that the bear is probably the apex predator in the nature in Europe, at least. It's an interesting species, of course, and it has this like a kind of a mellow side when it's eating berries, and then it can just kill you if it's protecting its offspring. And it's no wonder that bear is such an important figure in the mythological side of things in the past. Now that there is renaissance of this folk horror movie genre, like the classic Wicker Man. The Wicker Man is, of course, the old movie, and then there's the remake. But there's this Ari Aster, who is of the Hereditary in fame. He had this film called Midsommar, and for example, there was this witch. What do you think of this? What are your influences in the fiction, say, movies, books, and art?
Well, I always have a large soft spot for the 1970s, especially British sort of horror films and that kind of thing, largely because of the aesthetics, the textures, the themes, kind of. They have this, I don't know how to put it. It's very English in its sort of eerie yet slightly tongue-in-cheek, but also quite serious in some ways. But I very much enjoyed, the old kind of like Blood and Satan's Claw, and Wicker Man, Night of the Demon, that kind of thing. I enjoy those tremendously. The modern folk horror, I haven't seen a huge amount. What I've seen, I haven't been completely convinced by. I think I'm not sure whether it's because I have a particular enjoyment of. I'm no cinephile, so this is like not. This sounds like I'm being kind of cinematographically snobbish, but it's just the aesthetic I enjoy is the kind of texture of the film. In the 70s, that kind of that it's that grainy texture. I think, in a sense, the modern stuff is too cleanly shot. Some of it's, I mean, like A Field in England, I enjoyed. I thought that was very good, but I'm also not. I'm not a great fan of the way in which a lot of the modern folk horror seems to be politically charged. I don't see the need to inject kind of not terribly subtle political messages into it.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't see that as relevant or necessary. But I also haven't seen a tremendous amount, so it might be I've just seen the wrong ones, of course. But if I want to watch folk horror, essentially that kind of thing, I'll go to the
roots
late
of the
50s, 60s, 70s. Yeah,
I completely
also
understand.
because the soundtracks were tremendous, man. Like if you go to like oh god, Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, that kind of like 70s slightly psychedelic Italian almost funk stuff, and it's tremendous, man. It's really, really good.
Whenever there is some kind of renaissance of some like a particular topic or like a genre, for example, the folk horror, it's like it's pretty hard maybe to outdo the original, stuff, because it's like they always stem from something. I just have noticed that it's a growing trend nowadays. At least it seems to be.
It is, but all this stuff now. There's a great emphasis now on that kind of like cottage core. I just love crochet kind of thing, and it's like, okay, great. I don't want to get too cynical on it because I go on for ages about it, but this is, you know what I mean, man. This is kind of like, oh, I'm just so interested in folklore. Oh well, have you read blah 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 blah? You know, like the old folklore collections from people that, oh no, man, that's boring. I like there's this great Instagram page which I was, oh, for fuck's sake, man. The idea of like the depth of interest in these things is pretty minimal, I think, on most people.
Not any layperson has any kind of understanding or gnosis about that kind of thing, yet it still exists. For example, in any kind of topic, there is the deep end and there is the superficial, like the easygoing, low effort end of things. And I think, I hope this interview gives inspiration to people to do their own research, to delve deeper into these topics, because there's so much to dig. And as you pretty much understand as an archaeologist.
Well, I should say that a lot of these festivities, I mean, not only the Bear Festival is an important one, but there's lots of other things throughout the year which are still engaged with and are engaged with as a kind of party or enjoyment or a festive bit of fun, and that's perfectly fine. You know, I'm not at all saying that people need to, they can't practice unless they understand that. No, man. Just keep it going. Just keep it going, and if people want to go into it and really look into it, great. If not, fine. But for God's sake, just keep it going, because once it's gone, it's gone. I mean, it's much like these, so many things about culture is, I'm not going to go into it too much because I could go on, as I said, for a long time, but there's a tremendous willingness to sacrifice culture at the altar of economics. And economics bounces back, man. But culture, I mean, once it's gone, it's very difficult to resuscitate on a meaningful level.
Okay, much of this old heritage is gone, like without the efforts of the people who try to preserve it, such as you, of course. And
well, I mean, there's a large, well, comparatively, of course, we're talking comparatively large debate about all the kind of Rauhnacht celebrations and things where they've been over commercialized.
Yeah,
and to some degree, I can see that if you could say if it's reduced to like a ski town parade, then it's a bit of a shame. But on the other hand, at least it's still being done, and there's still money flowing into it to keep it going, because as long as it's still there, it can always be, twisted back or onto its original sense, or practiced in a more authentic fashion or whatever. But at least it's still there.
Yeah.
I mean, once it stops pulling people's attention, these things tend to get cut, or if they see it's too dangerous or whatever. And once it's cut, it's very difficult to put it back in.
That's so unfortunate, but what can you do? Except for doing what you do, of course. And
just record it, man.
Yeah,
record it as much as you can. put it somewhere, put it in the archives, have it as a resource people can go back and see at least. I think that's very, very important.
I very much agree. One last question for the first phase of this interview. Stay tuned because this is only the first half, and we are going to embark to the part two, the Numinos territory. But before that, I must ask you about your musical side of Perennial Pyrenees project. I already lost count of how many recordings you have released thus far, and I might add that they are completely free to download from your perennialpyrenees.com website. I have especially appreciated the blend of mellow drone synths and the ambient sounds such as singing of birds, and I saw that, of course, like field recordings you have used. What is your process for producing these albums, which are like so prolific? At times, it feels like you are like perhaps a man possessed, such as myself. But how do
Some
you
would say
go about these
some would say
things?
prolific.
Yeah,
Some would say prolific. Others would say far too much. I think it's like 100. I don't know. It's just shy of 120 now. But basically, okay. So to give a little bit of backstory to it, essentially in 2019, I believe, I wanted to do something Pyrenees focused, which was, I mean, okay, I've been. It sounds so trite, but a massive fan of music for, I don't know, God, 20, 25 years now, all sorts of different things. And I always wanted to do my own stuff, but I never really had the right time or place or aptitude or anything like that. Not that I think I have a tremendous aptitude now, but so 2019, I said, right, fuck it, let's just do it. And I thought, well, if we're here, really, because I really, really love things like Sturmpert and Jägerblut and that kind of thing, especially those sort of like mixture of field recordings and kind of rural-esque atmospheres and folklore and all that kind of thing. So I thought, well, that's the kind of thing I enjoy. Let's see if we can do something along that kind of vein to do with the Pyrenees, because I'm here. This is what I write about. This is what my kind of like spare time is really devoted to. So I came up with Pyreneumen, so called because people sometimes think it's Pyre-Newman, but it's Pyreneumen, Pyr colon Newman, because it's the Newman of the Pyrenees. So I thought, well, let's try that. And I did a couple things with that. And then I thought, well, I also really enjoy lots of, music from different parts of the world. And I would love to put out little kind of curated collections, some manipulated into like chopped sample loops, or others with more kind of longer authentic recordings of different parts of the world. So I started doing that with Mons Newman. And then I was like, well, I also really enjoy, they're kind of like looking at the kind of more kind of folk horror, British landscape, English folklore, that kind of thing. So I thought, well, let's just also have a project based on that. And that was Britha Newman. And so for a couple of years, basically, those three projects kind of went along their own lines of theme. The sounds were quite different. I would say Pyreneum is probably the most varied in terms of it does things from pure kind of like chopped and skewed field recording to black metal to God knows what, synthesized ambient stuff and other things in between, like folk music as well and whatever. Mons Newman, I've tried to keep more strict in terms of offering people kind of curated experiences of particular cultures within almost largely, relying on authentic recordings from that culture. Britha Newman, that's his own little kind of beast, which is much more kind of a mixture of M.R. James antiquarian eeriness and other things which kind of tie thematically into that kind of folkloric, sometimes very kind of romantic, others more kind of dark, but whatever. So we had those three. And then I think, God, I don't even remember, man. Like, I think at the end of last year, I started up the Hexafoil project, which is more kind of black metal focused, but more kind of, how to put it, exclusively or more kind of tightly black metal, but it has a lot of influences from like, I don't know what, like 70s crowd stuff and, other things as well. Basically, I wanted to make some black metal which was not terribly serious in terms of its appearance, but had that kind of like cheeky folk darkness to it. Like I called it quite tongue in cheek, like impish black metal, because it's meant to be a little bit kind of like, a little bit tongue in cheek. But I still mean it to be good. But I'm not going down the whole kind of like, Satan, world destruction kind of route, because I think that's massively overdone and tired and boring. So those are the kind of 4 principal now projects that exist. I put my stuff out. There are a couple other things, but they're kind of very much one-offs or whatever. The process of recording is very, very basic. I have GarageBand, which has an array of synthesizers. I have my computer keyboard, not a keyboard, but a computer keyboard.
Yes.
And I have my phone, which has a voice recorder, which I do all the field recordings or recording real instruments or vocals or whatever. So that's how I make what I make, basically. Of course, I use samples a lot. I chop them up in GarageBand and mess around with configurations, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, I don't have I wouldn't call it. It's not a home studio. It's just the computer and my telephone's voice recorder, basically. Field recordings in nature, same thing. Take the phone out, record, save it, send it to my computer, put it in GarageBand. There we are. So it's I like that because it's simple, and also in a way because it's quite constrained. It allows me to kind of like really push the amount of manipulation I can use with the program itself, which I now know how to use properly. And also, I like the fact that it's reasonably DIY. Everything I put up, everything I produce is first digital and for free on my website. Some get put on tape by my main tape man is Under the Dark Soil, and God love him for putting them out on tape. Thank you, Yang. I can't thank you enough for that. But the vast majority are digital only and free on my website. You can do whatever the hell you want with them, basically. And I like that DIY thing. That it's very much the same thing actually with the projects. Writing is, of course, I have an archaeological background and university stuff and blah 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 blah. But the real point comes down to, if you want to do it, you can go and do it. Everyone has the capacity now. Yeah, everyone has the capacity now with computers or whatever to, if they're really interested in something, they can go and do it. And so it's up to you to invest the time. But apart from that, you can go and do it.
I have noticed that my artist friends who are really like doing things with a passion, it's like they are constantly creating because there's nobody stopping them. For example, it's the same with me. As long as I have the inspiration, and we can speak more where that comes from in the next phase. But it's like as long as it's with me, I will do the art, even if I have like a one finger, so to speak. It's like there's nobody stopping me, and it's also something like the true artist needs to do in order to kind of mentally and or spiritually survive. It's not an option to not to do.
Well, I wouldn't call myself a true artist particularly.
Yeah, I didn't mean it that in any kind of
no.
Arrogant sense.
No. It's not that. No, I'm saying I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it's a great pleasure for me. It's a great hobby of mine, and I think that obviously some turn out better than others. And I think what I've done, a significant amount of it is perfectly reasonable, and some I think, personally speaking, is very good. But it's it's my pleasure, and I think that the enjoyable thing as well about doing some of them is that I can tie them into the Pyrenean research in a way. And other aspects, other things, I can branch out into some of like fiction aspects that I write about, or whatever. But it's all world building in a sense, and it's a great pleasure to be able to curate and put out things which I enjoy, and I feel that they, at the risk of sounding utterly pretentious, they kind of express something which I feel is important, or an atmosphere which I find particularly resonant, or whatever. But this I know some people who talk a lot about making an album. They have 1,000 pedals and all this kind of thing, right? But man, it's been like 2 years and you ain't done shit. Why not? Just do it. You have the time. I mean, most people have the time. It's just how they decide to use it. So
that's true.
If you really have this idea of like, I think a lot of people, not a lot, but I think definitely the case with some people, they have this, they enjoy the self-labeling of artist more than the actual work. And I find it surprising when you come across those kind of people, because it's like, well, you have the ability, you have everything, far more so than me. Just do it. Just do it. I mean, now with all the record labels that are available, for example, or whatever, I mean, you'll probably find some way to put it out if you want to put it out like on a physical format. But even if not, just have it out and let people enjoy it, or not. But at least you've done it, and I think a lot of it comes down to that. Actually, in my case, is proving to myself, whether it be books or music, that I can do it.
From what I have done with myself, I mean, like my own personal art and the art projects I have been involved in, it's always as kind of like a personal experience firsthand. And the end product is also, I don't mean in any kind of arrogant sense, is your own legacy. It's like that's up to other people if they find that interesting or not, but it's something you leave behind when you
exactly.
Yes.
And I really think that it's, if you can, then I think it's very nice to know that as you bow out of this world, that you've left something, to some degree beautiful in your stead when you go.
Like an artistic expression of yourself, your unique take on the world.
Exactly, because everyone has, well, not everybody, but I mean, a vast majority of people have, things inside them which are interesting or valuable, or some experience or whatever. And I think it's why not?
Yeah.
Why not? You have the time, you have the ability, you have the stuff. I mean, just do it. It's not like of course there are certain artistic people who are on another level or whatever, but I would say a lot of them aren't separate beings. They're not a separate species. Just do it. Put it out. Why not?
It's your gnosis, so to speak. It's like it's I think it's really something everyone should do if they have the capability. But at the end of this first phase, I would like to stand out my personal favorite of Pyrenees. It's called The Traveler from Taured, where Andorra wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story about the traveler arrived at the Japanese airport with a strange passport bearing the origin of Taured, a country he claimed had existed over 1,000 years ago. And this is like I think this is a special album even by your standards.
It's even in the rather eccentric collection.
I would advise our audience to check that one out, and also your prophilic back catalog over at perennialpyrenees.com. Our discussion will continue in the second part of this interview, which will be released soon. We will delve deep in such intriguing concepts as genius loci, aka the spirit of the place, the liminal, ur-occultism, and the numinous. Stay tuned for Pyre Numen's track a rival collision from the EP The Traveller from Taured, where Andorra wasn't. Good night.
It's July 1954. A hot day. A man arrives at Tokyo Airport in Japan. He's of Caucasian appearance and conventional looking, but the officials are suspicious. On checking his passport, they see that he hails from a country called Tao. The passport looks genuine, except for the fact that there is no such country as Tao, well, at least in our dimension. The man is then given a map and asked to point out his country. The man immediately points to the area occupied by the Principality of Andorra. The man says that his country has been in existence for 1,000 years and is a little puzzled why his country is called Andorra on the map. The man argues with the customs officers for a long time and refuses to give in. He is also carrying currencies of different countries, probably because he has made several business trips. The mystery man shares other details like the company for which he was working and the hotel where he will be staying. Officials find out that the company which he mentions exists in Tokyo but not in Tao. Similarly, the hotel he mentions does exist, but hotel employees inform them that no such booking was made. This prompts officers to take the man into custody for further interrogation. Officers are suspicious that he might be a criminal and confiscate his documents and personal belongings. The officers put the mystery man in a nearby hotel whilst they conduct their investigation, and they record his interrogation, in which he talks about his country Tao, which occupies the area of Andorra, its history and present status, prompting officers to wonder if he is lying or perhaps from another dimension with an alternative history.